Welcome to Futures Talks. This episode is brought to you by Imagine, Institute of Futures Studies at Iqra University and COMSTECH, Organization of Islamic Cooperation Standing Committee on Scientific and Technological Development of OIC. We are very happy to present an illustrious scientist, philosopher, and theologian to you today. Honorable Professor Dr. Golshani is a leading and distinguished theoretical physicist, academic, scholar, and philosopher. He is the founding chairman of the Faculty of Philosophy of Science and distinguished professor at the Sharif University of Technology. He is also the director of the Institute of Humanities and Cultural Studies, Tehran, Iran. Professor Dr. Golshani is a senior fellow of the School of Physics at the Institute for Studies in Theoretical Physics and Mathematics. His research interests are in particle physics, foundational and philosophical aspects of physics, philosophy of science, and theology. He is the winner of the first year of the prestigious Templeton Science and Religious course program, and he is among the former judges of the Templeton Prize. Today, we are going to talk to him about his personal journey, his work, his contribution, as well as the application of his works on the fulfillment of OIC action plan. Thank you, Professor Dr. Golshani, for joining us today from Tehran, Iran.
Yes. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salamun alaikum. I'm really glad to be with my Pakistani brothers, which I really like them, and I have been friends with many of them. And so I go very fast over my past schooling. I finished my school and high school in Isfahan, Iran. Then I went to Tehran University for a BS degree in physics. Then I went to the University of California, Berkeley for a PhD program. Then I returned to my country and joined Sharif University of Technology. At that time, the name of it was Mehdi University of Technology. I became the chairman of that department, the vice chancellor of that university, and the head of the philosophy of science department. In fact, I established philosophy of science department in Iran for the first time at this university, and have been involved in various projects. Especially, I have trained some very, very good physics students in foundational problems of physics, in philosophy of science, and I have been working on the border between theology and science. I have done a lot of things on it, and have been a member of many international associations in this regard. For example, European Society for Science and Theology, International Science and Religion Association, USSR, and many, many other institutes in that respect, and have been involved in this. So this, I just went short over my thing. From the beginning that I joined Sharif University, I noticed that physics needs to become closer to philosophy, because I had gone in detail over quarrels and challenges in physics. In quantum physics, I had gone in detail on it and noted that there was much difference between Einstein and the other side. And I noticed that there has been misjudgments about what happened there. So I trained many students in this respect. About 30 years ago, I wrote a book on analysis of philosophical problems in physics. And a lot of things that I said there now, it has become popular by eminent physics professors across the US and Europe, both. Um, and in fact, I have been, after recommending that there needs to be a revolution in both cosmology and quantum physics in detail. And I'm writing also a book in this regard, that there is a need for revolution based on the judgment of many celebrities and first-rate physicists, which have reached this conclusion that we can, for example, do everything with quantum physics, explain every phenomenon with quantum physics, but we cannot understand that theory at all, which now they have returned to the fact that they have to look for another theory. So this is the kind of thing that we have been doing. One of the other things that I have been involved is the relation between science and religion, which I have recently written a very detailed book about what needs to be done. And the English version of my book is being published now by Echo Institute, the English version. So I have been involved with the science and religion dialogue, which I think the Islamic world hasn't heard that kind of thing much. In other words, a lot of things has happened among the first-rate physicists, biologists, etc., which is not reflected in the Islamic world. Some of the discoveries are immediately reflected. Some of the other findings are immediately reflected. But the fact that some of the celebrities in physics have seriously changed their mind and they are talking about revolution is not heard. Besides that, another thing has happened which is not reached the Islamic world, and that is the fact that many top-rated physicists have found that they need to co-work with philosophers. In other words, in order to solve some of the top, very important problems and challenging problems in physics, there is a need for collaboration between physicists and philosophers. And that is reflected in for example, in the fact that about 10 years ago, 4 universities in the east of America and 1 branch of University of California in the west started to have a collaboration between physicists, philosophers, etc. And immediately, a year after that, Oxford and Cambridge did the same thing. And they are collaborating in order to solve the problems in cosmology and other areas, which I think it is very, very fruitful. But another fact which has happened in the West, and it wasn't there, is the fact that when I was a student in 1960s in US, there was no collaboration between humanities and basic sciences or humanities and engineering sciences, etc. Now that has changed a lot. For example, at that time that I was at Berkeley, MIT had only engineering departments. Now it has started to have a humanities section, a large section on humanities, and also is giving a joint degree in humanities and basic sciences, and a degree in engineering and humanities, in basic sciences and humanities. A lot of things has changed. And also there is a lot of collaboration between church people and physics departments, biology departments, etc. Many church people have started to get a PhD in physics, in engineering, in other fields. So there is a lot of collaboration. For example, many common programs have been done by physicists, philosophers, engineers, various fields. mathematicians, etc., which has been very blessing for religion. So at the time that I was at Berkeley, when there was a challenge against religion, there was no answer from physicists. At that time, the main problems arose from philosophers. But then a lot of some physicists, celebrated physicists like Hawking, etc., started to have challenges against religion, that there is no need for God, etc. The important thing that happened is that many top-rated physicists started to answer and to involve themselves with this thing. So that, for example, Paul Davies says that when he wrote the book, one of his books, then there was so much reception from religious physicists that he thought the atmosphere has changed. And this is what he mentions in The Mind of God. There he says that there is plenty of change. So, and this opportunities is not used by Islamic countries, unfortunately. Neither the collaboration between church and physical sciences and biological sciences is repeated in our countries. And for example, there, as I said, some Christians have started, some clergy have started to get a PhD in physics, etc. We don't have much of this kind of opportunity in the Islamic world. So I think there has to be serious actions as far as some of the things are concerned that I'm going to explain, some of them. If you think there is anything needed, I say now. Otherwise, I go and talk about some of the challenges which are the Islamic world is confronted and have to take care of it. Of course, there is the Islamic the World Academy of Sciences, which I am a member. Some of the Islamic countries have academies of sciences, but there is not much collaboration between them. And they haven't involved themselves with solving this kind of problems and taking care of some of the changes, the important changes that has happened in the West among the celebrities of science. So this is the kind of thing which I think is needed, and OIC has to involve them itself, which if you permit, I go and talk about them.
Professor, you have written on the relationship between physics and philosophy and religion. So
Yes.
how do you connect these three together?
Okay, it's a very good question. Very good question. You see, people, when the Greeks were doing science, a philosophy umbrella was over their sciences. They got some principles, basic principles from philosophy, and they used them for making sciences. This was repeated in the Islamic during the Islamic civilization. Avicenna, Biruni, etc., had a mentality, a holism, a holistic picture, which they used it in making sciences. They did science exactly the way we are doing it now. Experimental science plus theory making, etc. They were doing this, but they were taking some general principles from philosophy, and their principles were coincident with those which are in religion, very general principles of religion. So a lot of them, Biruni and others, said very clearly, and I have mentioned it in my book, which are translated in some of their various languages. They mentioned that they consider scientific activity as a kind of worship. They considered this. This was repeated during the Middle Ages. There was also this holistic picture there. They used philosophy as an umbrella for their sciences, and they frequently, Kepler, Leibniz, etc., said very clearly that they consider the science activities as a kind of worship. But the things changed. In the by that I mean there became a positivistic picture, which became very prevalent. The fact that only those things are important that can be rooted in our senses, otherwise are not important. So they put aside philosophy, they put aside religion, because they couldn't see that those things by their senses. And this was magnified by Auguste Comte positivism, and then by some physicists like Mach repeated the same thing. And quantum physics was also started with this positivistic thinking. So in the beginning of 20th century, the religious thinking went aside, philosophical thinking went aside, and they were saying that they are not using philosophy at all. While Einstein and others mentioned very clearly no, that they are using philosophy. They don't see that they are using philosophy. But a lot of things happened during the second half of the 20th century. First of all, during the first half, two world wars happened, which destroyed millions of people. Then they found that science cannot take care of everything. Something has to be added. That, for example, Russell, who himself said that there is nothing important but those things which are rooted in senses. In other words, the science by its usual meaning. In 1924, after the First World War, wrote a book, a small book that I have. In that book, we said, if science goes this way, there is no end for, there is no future for humanity. It's very dangerous for doing this way. And then after the bomb was used for Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Einstein and Russell, etc., proclaimed, they had a declaration in which they said there are dangerous things happening to humanity. This was the first signal that the science by itself cannot save humanity. But other things happened. What happened, for example, was that Popper said that we cannot explain values, moral values, through science. We cannot get issues related with morality from scientific terms. We cannot get it. But at the same time, he said something else. He said, when you go to the human level, science and morality are combined. So science cannot explain moral values, but you know that humanity cannot live without human values. So you need a wider umbrella, a more comprehensive umbrella. But something more important happened. The thing which happened was that various schools of philosophy of science developed, which were different, had different views among a lot of things. But they were sharing one thing, that we do not confront nature with empty minds. We always, in the interpretation of our sense data, we always use some assumptions which are behind our mind. So we are going to choose different theories based on the basis of our basic assumptions. And these assumptions are very general things. For example, we assume that we can understand nature. We assume that we can explain nature by mathematics. Why we can explain science by mathematics, nature by mathematics? This we cannot explain. Then it happened that they said that there are a lot of other questions that we cannot explain by science. And this kind of things said by what people, what kind of people? By physicists and by biologists, etc. For example, one biologist who got the Nobel Prize in medicine said that we cannot say where we are coming from, what are we doing in the world, where we are going to go, etc. We cannot get answer to these questions from science. As we should, a lot of other physicists and other scientists like biologists, etc., repeated the same kind of thing. And some of them, which I have explained in my books, have mentioned that we can get answer to this kind of questions only from religion. For example, why the world is governed by this kind of laws, not other kind of laws, etc. Then they found that without exception, all theoreticians are using some fundamental principles in choosing between theories. Einstein believed in, for example, the law of causality. Bohr believed in chance, in the ruling of chance. So he said at the atomic level, electron is using chance. With electron confronts a magnetic field, it either goes by chance, up or down. Einstein did not believe that. He said, no, right now we do not know the cause. But if we look further in the future, we can find out why he went up or why he went down. So these principles were there. And so they found that they cannot run away from philosophy. This is what they found. And the other thing is that it is for that reason that in recent decade, in the last 3 decades, especially in recent decade, a lot of physicists are saying, and I have the article, that physics needs philosophy, philosophy needs physics. Both of them need each other. So this has happened. Another thing which has happened is that they have found that some very general principles that they are using are really based on religion. For example, Einstein said that the fact that we can understand nature is taken from monotheistic religions. That's what he said, explicitly said. Or for example, Linde, who is a Russian physicist now in Stanford, and he's a very important cosmologist. He said physicists are looking after unifying all forces. We have 4 forces in nature: gravitational, electromagnetic, weak nuclear force, a strong nuclear force. People are trying to unify this. Linde is saying that this unification feature is rooted in monotheistic religions. We are getting this from monotheistic religions. And when people asked Glashow and Weinberg, both of them were our teacher in Berkeley and got Nobel Prize for this unification of 2 forces. When this happened, people went, the newspaper men went and asked them, why you went after unification of forces? They said because in order to simplify these things. But they asked Professor Abdul Salam, why are you after this? You went. He said, maybe it's the monotheism. The monotheism caused me to go after unification of forces. So they found out that there are a lot of basic principles which are used in making theories, and physicists and scientists need to use some basic principles, and the fact that science's monotheistic religions can give these principles. And I have in one of the conferences that I attended in Berkeley, I gave a lot of commonalities between the monotheistic religions in some of the principles which are overruling science, which are used by different scientists, even though they are not religious people in appearance, but they are using those principles, and those principles are used in religions as basic principles of religion. So this is the thing which has caused the collaboration between physicists, biologists, church people, and mathematicians and philosophers. If you attend the European Society for Science and Religion, Science and Theology, which every 2 years is formed in one of the European countries, you see how people from different disciplines are there and they are discussing about this subject. For example, the Theology and Science Center in Berkeley, had a very important conference in 1998, which I attended. There, before forming that conference, before having that conference, 6 months before that, they had 4 workshops. Workshop between physicists, workshop between cosmologists, workshop between biologists, workshop between sciences of cognition scientists. And then they joined at the conference. God knows how blessing that conference was. When they had a conversation, there was a conversation between them. So this has shown that the collaboration between physics, between science, philosophy, and religion is very fruitful. Christian church found this very useful, and so did a lot of things for it. It's now for Islamic countries to do the same kind of thing. It is very fruitful. I have found it. And so in one of the books that I have written, that it is going to be published by Eco Society, which Pakistan has also membership, is also a member of that. In that book, which I have shown how philosophy and science and religion are combined to answer all of the challenging questions which religion is confronted with. So this is the thing which has happened. It's a very blessing. As I said, when very blessing happenings. When I was in Berkeley, none of these things was present. Now these things are present. For example, at that time, there was no society for believing philosophers. Now the society for believing philosophers have many thousand members. Harvard has published a book entitled Believing Philosophers. It's a lot of important philosophers who was disbelieving in religion and changed their behavior and their thought and became believing in religion. So a lot of things has happened. For that reason, Islamic world has really to be aware. Only do not imitate West in the things which are ugly and are not, and they are materialistic. Go and look what has happened in the positive sense.
Professor, it was very interesting to know the relationship between science, philosophy, and religion. Professor, you have also talked about the systems being determined in a way that they are rational and they are determined. And you also said that in the subatomic physics, there were some phenomena which were not being explained, and that was making it difficult for the scientists to predict the end, the product of it. And you said that Einstein also mentioned that these are the things that we do not know right now, but later on maybe we'll find the explanation for it. If the universe is evolving, then how is that system can be determined? How can it be predicted if it is still evolving?
You see, the point that it was mentioned by some top-rated physicists, and it is not known among regular scientists, is the fact that we can never claim the finality of any theory. Never claim. This is what Feynman said. Feynman, in the early 20th century, Planck had said that. But in the second half of 20th century, Feynman said that. You know, Feynman wasn't a religious man, but he said that we can never say that this is the final thing. And the thing which is certain now, 100 years from now, it could not be, it could be a different thing. You see, we have many examples of this. And it is understandable. You see, in the beginning of 20th century, we found out that there are atoms, and we had the Mendeleev table. We have atoms. Then 10 years after that, Bohr claimed that the atom consists of electrons and nucleus, which are revolving, electrons are revolving around the nucleus. 20 years after that, they found that the nucleus itself consists of proton and neutron. 30 years after that, they found that proton and neutron themselves are made of quarks. This means that our science is developing more and more. We get useful things, we get beneficial things, but we can never claim finality. In the 19th century, we knew two forces, electromagnetic force and gravitational force. In 20th century, we found two more forces. Who can claim that there are no other forces? And in the future, we do not find fifth and sixth force, etc. If you accept this, then there is room for more and more and more development. This is one thing. The second thing, as I mentioned, is that in explaining things and choosing between theories, you have to see the fertility of the theories. For example, Weinberg, which was my professor in Berkeley also, claims that the more you study nature, the more you find it purposeless. Then there was a lot of claim against this claim. And Paul Davies, for example, said, if there is no purpose in life, then we don't know what happened. So why are we studying? And the second thing is that if you think there is no purpose, why do you study? But if you think there is a purpose, you look more and more and more, and you find more and more and more. So this is more fruitful. So between things, there is no equality between theories. At one time, both of them or the three of them or more explain all of the present experiments. But some experiments, when some experiments are done, some of them these are ruled out. When I was in 1976, was in Pennsylvania for a sabbatical leave, there were a couple of theories explaining the weak interactions and electromagnetic interactions, the unifying force. A couple of theories. One experiment was done, and some of them were put aside. So this means that we have room for more and more and more development. And if this was the case, then science wouldn't be exciting. The exciting is that you get more and more and more. But if you see that the world is this, you read just a book, this is this, there is no excitement. So I think this is the religious view that says that there is no end. You have to study more and more. You have to study more and more. This has a wide, you see, religion in our Islamic countries are only restricted to praying and fasting, etc. But has a lot of intellectual things, which is very useful and gives you a wide perspective that you never stop for searching, really. This is the important thing. And our philosophers, like Ibn Sina, Biruni, etc., were very clever in using this wider perspective. So they were not confined to what they had got from Greek people, Greek philosophers. They were not confined. For example, Ibn Haytham, which has done some good work in optics, and even now they remember his findings, new findings, etc., wrote a book that complained about the thing that Majesty had said about optics, had explained the earlier theories of optics, light. He objected. He said, we have to think, we have to argue and accept only things on the basis of argument. They were very, very bright intellectuals. Right now, I don't see that depth prevalent in our universities. They are counting only on the West to get everything in the West. But Ibn Sina or Biruni were not confined to what they got from the West. Biruni says to Ibn Sina in a questionnaire, why do you say that we have only one world? The argument of Aristotle for having one world is not really exciting, is not confidential, is not acceptable. His argument is not acceptable. So it means they were thinking brightly, freshly, with argument, etc. But now we are counting only on getting things from the West. This is one of the things which I wanted to mention. Before you go to other questions and subjects, I wanted to add two things. One of them was that I said that religion is used, can be used and is used, not at experimentation, etc. But I have written a book which recently I have translated into English, but it's not published. There I have given of every challenging problem in physics, which is in which there is an important assumption principle involved. And that principle is either against religion or pro-religion. In other words, I have explained that this is really a choice, and a choice between assumptions. And these assumptions are not neutral always. Sometimes they are neutral, but most of the times in some of the problems, like the creation of the world, etc., are pro-religion or against religion. The second subject that I wanted to add, and I think it's important to mention, is about Hawking. Hawking was a very good physicist at some presenting some theories. But I think he was extremely naive as far as his judgment about philosophy is concerned. Let me tell you why. He said he is a physicist. I have explained it in the book in detail. He said he is a positivist. He's a positivist, and he is a positivist of the Popper school. He believes in positivism of Popper school. But the fact is that Popper was one of the first philosophers who fought positivism. He didn't know this subject. And he said a lot of things that the first-rate physicist answered him. First-rate physicist. For example, George Ellis was his teacher in Cambridge, among his teachers. He answers, mentions all of these shortcomings of Hawking. His student, Dr. Page, who is in Canada, had also answered all of these things. So as far as philosophy and his judgment and usage of philosophy is extremely naive. And so I think you should not sell, one should not sell himself to anybody, should use judgment. This is the thing I wanted to say. Unfortunately, the answers that physicists and philosophers have given to things said by Hawking is not very popular. Only his sayings has become very popular.
This year's Nobel Prize for Physics has gone to Sir Roger Penrose for his work on black hole. And he claims that based on the evidences, there was not only one Big Bang, but these Big Bangs are continuous. And that leads to the theory of multiverses instead of one single universe. How does that change the paradigm of physics?
You see, first of all, this many word, this is also explained in my books in detail. You see, some people thought, the reason, especially the reason that multiverse came in more and more in order to avoid God was because of the anthropic principle. And people found out that in order for conscious people to appear, and in order there has to be, as far as the material section of the matter is concerned, there has to be carbon, etc., etc. And for this, the universe has to have certain age for this to have happened, and for that there has to be a very clear ratio between different forces. The four forces. A strong force, for example, at the moment is 10 to the 14th power of the weak force. and a strong force is 100 times stronger than electromagnetic force. This is, if it is changed a little bit, there would have not been this kind of world. So in order to explain this fine tuning, either people have appealed to God, superpowers with super knowledge, etc., or they have gone to many worlds. And they said that there are many universes, multi-universes, etc. And they thought that they have finished the thing. They have got rid of God. But first of all, multiverse, first of all, George Davis said, these many universes that you are thinking, you are talking about are parallel forces, universes. And these are not seen. And in science, you are accepting things on the basis of observation. So how do you accept having millions of worlds that are not seeable, etc., visible, etc., but you cannot, this is a metaphysical assumption, but you do not accept a single God, the super-power God. But besides that, they have answered in a more clever and deeper way. And that is the fact that, for example, Razi, Imam Fakhr Razi, wrote a tafsir, an interpretation of the Holy Quran, a tafsir al-Kabir. There, he wanted to interpret the word Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. It is talked about various worlds. He said people say that this world refers to this or that or that. No, we have different worlds. God is powerful enough to have different worlds. This is exactly the same thing that George Ellis says. But more than that, in Shia sect, for example, we have from our imams that they have said, before this world, there was another world, before that, there was another world. And the reasoning, or philosophers' reasoning for this kind of assumption is that the effusion of God is infinite, is not stoppable, is not limited. If God, for example, started 14 billion years ago, what was the effusion of God? Where was the effusion of God? So the infinity of effusion of God means that there has been always there this kind of thing. So it is not only against religion, it is pro-religion. And so many philosophers, and I have explained that also some Western philosophers, present philosophers, for example, Kewart of Oxford, etc. These are saying the same kind of thing. And an American, it's interesting, an American philosopher is exactly having the same argument, that because of the infinity of God's effusion, there could be many worlds. A God that could create one world could create infinitely many worlds. Besides that, John Pochinghorn said, you see, if we have infinitely many worlds, then one of them could be like the one we have. No, you have infinitely many numbers like 1, 3, 4, 1, 3, 5, 7, etc. You don't have any second, 4, etc. And anyway, there need not be necessarily in the infinity of world this world. But as I said, the most important argument is the argument of our philosophers, both Muslim and Christians right now, that they are the same thing, that God's effusion is infinite. There is no reason why we should argue against infinitely many worlds.
Professor Golshani, science was not taking up consciousness as something to delve on or to study. And now we are seeing scientists studying consciousness even in physics. And
Yes.
the reason they said that there is an effect which is called observer's effect, which changes the reality. So how do we study consciousness in physics?
Well, it's a very good question. I especially like it because a lot of things has happened, and I had a very long article published in Persian, which I gave the English version of it to some of the journals. It's not published yet, but a long that things have changed a lot. First of all, in the last 100 years, you start from Planck till now. Top-rated physicists like Bohr, Heisenberg, Planck, to our time, for example, Witten, who is at the head of the superstring theory, the most well-known theory now. All of them say consciousness is beyond physics. Never, they say, never physics could explain consciousness, human consciousness. Now, this thing was not prevalent among biologists or philosophers, etc. But this also has happened. For example, Popper and even Penrose are saying that with the present science, we can never explain consciousness. If there is any chance in the future, that's different. But some of the most important ones say we never. For example, Witten says, you know, a string theory was so much popular that they even didn't employ some professors because they were not in a string theory at Harvard, etc. But now, Witten is at the head of it. Witten says, one day our theory could become successful, but we can never explain our human consciousness. They say that you cannot explain human consciousness on the basis of brain or neurons activity. This is what they are saying. And there were some experiments. I even have mentioned in my book, in my article, the experiments which are done. By the experiments that are done recent in the last 20 years, were claiming that they can explain, but now they changed it, and the same person claims that they can never explain it. And some top-rate physicists who had got Nobel Prize in top-rate biologists or neurologists who had got top-rate prize, they say that we can never explain consciousness. It's interesting that very interesting that Eccles, who got Nobel Prize in physics, says exactly what the religions, monotheistic religions are saying. Said consciousness is God's special effusion to human beings at certain level when the child is in her mother's womb. It's a special God's effusion. The same kind of thing says Mott, which was a British physicist who got Nobel Prize in physics because of X-ray crystallography. He says exactly the same thing, that this is a God's special effusion. So the things have changed a lot. And the thing that it's unfortunate is that these things have not been reflected in the schools of, in the universities of Islamic countries. These are very recent, just this 20 or 30 years.
Professor, we are very interested in physics these days. There are a number of theories which the physicists have shared with the world. One of them is the string theory. The other one is membrane or M theory. And the string theory itself sounds very fantastic. They say that there is a possibility of parallel world. There is a possibility of multiverses. There are more than 3 physical dimensions. So we cannot make sense of it. Are these scientific theories? Do we have any evidences behind them? Can we apply them right now, or these are only speculations so far?
You see, a thing which is very interesting is that the status of a string theory in the West has changed completely. At that, up to maybe 20 years ago, a string theory was so much popular that was the most popular theory. Right now, it's not that way. And that's because now it has no prediction, which is not the same, which is not given by other theories. And none of his specific predictions have been observed, or they are so far from observation that maybe they can never be observed, because they are working with energies which are not accessible, even if you make an accelerator at the level of our galaxy, So now this is a theory, but the important thing is that right now, not 20 years ago, they have found that they are very unhappiness about the present theories because they cannot change some of the things. But for example, the regular quantum theory, which is very popular and explain everything, cannot explain some numbers. And Weinberg, which was our teacher, was saying that I hope something happens that that changes the minds or changes the theory, etc. This theory can explain everything, but there nothing comes that destroys this theory. And I wish something happens that at least we go one step ahead. We have stopped there. There has no been advancement, really. This is the thing. And now, so for that reason, it's because of that physicists have listened to Einstein's advice in 1920s. Einstein was that physicists have collaborated with philosophers, so they have a more holistic picture of the thing. You see, the thing that physicists neglect is Heisenberg's advice. Heisenberg has a very beautiful sentence, which I am quoting in my books very often. It says, don't see the world only with the glass of physics. The world is larger than physics. It has other aspects. It's because of that multi disciplines have become very active now. We have become very active. You can't see the world through only one eye. Physicists is something, biology is something, a neurologist something else, etc. This collaboration is really needed. And this is what they have started in the West.
Professor Golshani, you have contributed significantly to physics, philosophy, and theology. And the question is that you must have found number of challenges on the way. And what were the key challenges you have faced and how you have overcome them in doing your science and philosophy and theology?
Well, I don't see, from one point of view, I don't see any challenge, because I think that science is advancing. So we should not confine to what we know now. Right now, what we know, a lot of challenging questions. We don't have any answer for them. So what is the solution for this? Is that not all people work in the same theory. This is the advice that Weinberg gave. Weinberg said that some people, it's very good, and he was also pro string theory. He said it's very good that some people are working on a string theory, but it's good that not all of them are working, because if it goes wrong, that the whole energy of physicists has been lost. So I think there has to be more variety of thinking, more confronting challenges more. You know, they are now following fashion. There is a beautiful book by Penrose entitled Fashion. You see, more fashion, etc., etc. I don't remember the whole name. A book was published in 1915, I think. He had given a lecture in Princeton, etc., and then he finally made it a book. I recommend every physicist, every scientist to read that book. He says that fashion is really overcoming all of the most of the physicists. They are following it. Einstein was also complaining because fashion among physicists is more prevalent than among ladies, dresses, etc. So I think right now most people are working on the thing which has become fashion. They have to go after challenges, have different looking, etc. Then there is going to be a thing. You see, the reason that suddenly physics changed was that Einstein was looking after a more deep questions. He was not satisfied with special relativity. He thought for this philosophical reason, he has to go beyond. So there has to be, this is the way, and it's never disappointing. I think they have to go for it and they get it. And right now is one of the golden time opportunity for discoveries. You see, Weinberg in his book, which was published 5 years ago, 1915, recommends that people go after a revolution in quantum. And then he said, maybe this discovery comes by a graduate student. He said maybe it comes by a graduate, but he recommended going after new things. This is the way it should be. We shouldn't follow mode. We have been following fashion really. This is what Penrose is challenging, sees it challenging, and he's fighting with it. And this is what Weinberg said, etc. So I think that people have to become more and more aware. And the youth, and the Islamic scientists should really have more free-minded. They don't say that this is the argument is the most important thing. Submit yourself to argument. Don't be passive and accept everything which has become fashion.
Professor Dr. Golshani, this is one question regarding OIC member states and how they can help in connecting the scientists among the OIC member states. How can the governments can help? How Islamic and how should scientists network with each other in order to collaborate and cooperate? If you could please share your thoughts on that.
You see, but I have written a couple of recommendations. First of all, we have some problems. Yet one of them is that usually weak students go after basic sciences. Medical students go after basic sciences. And they are going after engineering, somewhat to basic sciences, but more toward engineering and medical sciences, etc. This has to change. The most talented people should go after basic sciences. This is, for example, in America, this is the case. So this was some of the cases. In the Islamic countries, the private sector is forgotten. The governments cannot handle all of the economic aspects of the thing. So private sector has to come in and take care of the things. So governments should look for this kind of collaboration. And this is forgotten. This is another problem. People and scientists in our countries have forgotten to pay attention to our indigenous needs. What our countries needs, the basic needs. We are getting everything from the West, importing everything from the West, but we are capable, really capable of taking care of it, because West, whenever decides, can deprive us from them and from those things, etc. And this is what they have done. So we have to take care of our needs ourselves. You see, we have a verse in the Quran, وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ, which says that, we should try ourselves, and we are going to be superior if we are really believers. Believers means that to listen to what God has recommended. Talabul ilm farizatun ala kulli Muslim. Every Muslim should seek knowledge. We haven't done it. قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَانْظُرُوا كَيْفَ بَدَأَ الْخَلْقِ. Go around the earth, do experimentation, do theoretical work and find out how God created this world. Have we listened to that? No, we haven't listened to that. In 1973, I was in Pakistan at a conference that the late Ziaul Haq had arranged, Science in Islamic Polity. There, a lady stood up and said, if there is so much recommendation in the Holy Quran about seeking science, I got up and said, because we are not listening to what Quran has said, and just read this verse. Go around the earth and find and have some theoretical reflection to find out how God created the world. So this, we haven't done it really. And so we are in need of our indigenous as national needs, really. We need it. And finally, we have forgotten the Islamic world should not only get science from the Western world. They should go after innovation. We haven't done it really. You see, Professor Weinberg said in one of these papers, in the last 40 years that papers have reached me from the Islamic world, in cosmology and and atomic physics, etc. None of them were worthy of study. Of course, some articles have reached me from the Muslims in the West. We haven't listened to Quran that says, وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. Faith not, neither sorrow, you shall be the superior ones if you are believers. Ali Imran 139. So we haven't done really. We haven't done that. Now, so one of my recommendations to scientists in the Islamic world, and I think OIC has do this kind of thing through the academies of the Islamic world. They can do that because I'm a member of our academy. I see that I can do that. We can do that. But government should pay attention to the academies. In the Islamic world, the academies of science don't have that much power. The government is not trying to listen to them. So this is really a problem. But OIC could try to encourage government to listen, to take care of our needs. And one of the other things is in our looking. In our Islamic world, the materialistic worldview is governing our minds, really. This is God for doing prayer, etc. And this is our, they don't have anything to do with each other. This is not the case. We are here to find out what this world is, what we are doing. This is the insistence of our philosophers and our texts, religious texts, that we have to find out. Then we are going to be surprised of the glory of the God. This is the sentence that Leibniz said, Kepler said, etc. They are studying science because they want to see the glory of God in the world. In our country, science is not studied for this. So there has to be a theistic overlooking, a theistic mentality, the worldview, being ruling over the sciences. And this has to be done in a scholarly way, not in a bad way or forceful way, etc. In a argumentic way. This has to be done. And if they do that, they do see their duty to have to change the status of the Islamic world, their countries, their status. Right now, we don't have any status. They are doing whatever they want to our countries. And they deprive us of everything that we need sometimes. So we have to take care of ourselves. Japan proved that it can do that. Some countries prove that they can do that. Because if you look at the history of Japan in the early 19th century, nothing is there. But in the early 20th century, they shared a Nobel Prize in physics with Schwinger and another, Feynman and Schwinger. two top-rated physicists, a Japanese physicist got the same prize. So they did a lot of things, but we haven't done it. The criteria that they have put for the rating of scientists in our country is making them away for doing novel things, for taking care of indigenous needs, etc. This has to change. So my recommendation is that we have to take care of our needs. We have to go after new things, and we have to change our mentality. Very important. It is important to change our mentality. A couple of items I summarized in 8 items to shorten this question, not the questions, this question. We must have a long-term development plan and science policy, and we should build our own scientific and technological infrastructure. 2, Muslim nations should spend much more on science and technology than they are doing now. They are not their first priority. Our science education has to be geared to our national interest. A lot of things that we do, Europeans or Americans are getting benefit rather than our national interests or needs. There should be a delicate balance between the investment in pure science, applied science, and technology. A balance between them. We should create centers of excellence in some pioneering fields of science and technology and consider potentialities and priorities. Muslim nations should establish their own distinctive framework for scientific work, which means Islamic worldview. And they should try to avoid falling under the spell of a materialistic worldview devoid of moral values. You see, in the West, a lot of expenses are done for the sake of material causes. And Nicholas Maxwell, who is a superior philosopher of science, says in America, 50% of the science development, etc., money is spent on military purpose, for military purposes, 50%. And in UK, 30% of the budget for advances of science, etc., is done for military purposes. And he's surprised that scientists are silent and are not saying anything. So this means that our scientists have to be careful about what they are doing, what our priorities are, and this is not what we are doing right now. One thing, the fragmentation of science. If somebody learns biology, somebody learns physics, etc. They don't have collaboration, etc. And they are thinking one-dimensionally. This has to change. This is a strong recommendation in the West now. And the multidisciplinary business is just started because of that. This has to change. And if they look at what is done in the West, they learn that this is needed for them to do it themselves. Finally, I would like to quote a sentence from Professor Ataur Rahman, which said it in 1977 conference in Mecca. And this is a very thoughtful sentence which summarizes this part of questionnaire. The end products of the system of education, you see, 1977, 50 years ago, he has said this. The end product of the system of education should be men of outstanding caliber, excelling in their own fields of learning, but at the same time conforming to the Islamic ideology in their thoughts and deeds. Courses should include a comprehensive program of religious education at a school and university, clearly defining the limits of scientific knowledge and clarifying how modern technological advances fit in with Islamic values so that the evils of materialism can be avoided. This is very thoughtful advice, and I think if we follow it, and OIC follows that and takes and forces the academies of science, or recommends the academies of sciences in the Islamic world to do that, it's going to be a lot of things are going to change. Islam can come to the top if they are doing the things which is said. You see, during the 7th century, a Shafi'i faqih said, why in our environment, all of the physicians are Christians or Jews? What are we doing? It was his concern that what we are doing. This is actually what is happening now, and it should change. And I think OIC can do a lot about that. Thank you.
Professor, this is my last question before you leave, and this is about the role of imagination in your scientific endeavors. Einstein has famously said that he works with his imagination, and he is an artist.
Yeah, you see, what I have been doing first, when I was in, and I think it was a good luck, when I was in high school, I started to learn Islamic philosophy. That broadened my mind even when the questions of physics come in. So I always asking questions because of that, even at high school and then at the university. That has been a very changing agent for me. And the other thing is that I have never confined to read a specific school. I have always read different schools. It's quantum theory. I am reading this side of a school and that school's saying, etc. So I have been looking widely. This is the thing that I recommend. Unfortunately, when people start with something, they confine themselves to that and deprive themselves from other views which could be useful in broadening their results.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Golshani. We really appreciate your time, and we salute you for your service to humanity. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I really am happy to see you, and I really wish your country blessing of God. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today to meet and learn from a leading OIC member state scientist, Professor Mehdi Golshani. In next episode, we will bring you another leading scientist from OIC member state. Please stay tuned and be well.